Welcome. I'm Bertram Souza, veteran journalist and host of the Scribbler video podcast that's dedicated to exposing hatred in all its forms. Today, we continue our focus on religious hate in the United States and around the world. Our most recent podcast spotlighted the rise in anti-Semitism, including attacks on Jews. Now, we turn our attention to the rise in Islamophobia and attacks on Muslims. In 2024, there were 8,658 complaints related to anti-Muslim and anti-Arab incidents, according to the Council on American-Islamic Relations, one of the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy groups in the United States. And the FBI reports anti-Muslim hate in the U.S. increased drastically following the Gaza war, with incidents rising by 300% in 2 months. Then last week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott raised the stakes when he proclaimed the Council on American-Islamic Relations a, quote, foreign terrorist organization. Abbott said the proclamation allows the state to try shutting them down, the Associated Press reported. CAIR told Abbott in a letter that his announcement had no basis, quote, in law of fact. The group accused his office of stoking, quote, anti-Muslim hysteria. But Abbott isn't the only prominent elected official to target Muslims. In November 2017, then President Donald Trump issued various pronouncements against Muslims, including this one: Islam hates us. Trump pursued a policy to ban Muslims from certain countries from entering the United States. So, how are Muslims coping with this continuing threat against their community and rise in Islamophobia? I'm fortunate to be joined by two individuals who have given a lot of thought to the current state of affairs. Phaeton Oda is Executive Director of CARE Ohio in Cleveland. Phaeton has relatives and friends in the Mahoning Valley. Dr. Taji Terrell is a former Youngstown State University professor. Taji produces and edits this podcast and occasionally serves as my co-host. Thank you, Phaeton and Taji, for joining me to talk about this most important issue. Phaeton, let me start by asking you to tell us about yourself and particularly how you got involved in Muslim community activism.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Phaeton Oda. I am the Executive Director of the Northern Ohio chapter of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. I first started with this organization many years ago when I first moved to Cleveland. I moved from Greenville, North Carolina, where we had a very small Muslim community. And I first heard of this organization through a friend, and I asked my mom about it, and she said, this is a great organization, you should definitely get involved. And what appealed to me most is that CARE, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, really advocates for justice for all Americans, and that's something that is very dear to my heart. I grew up here in the United States of America. I was raised Muslim. I'm Palestinian.
So your parents came from Palestine?
Yes, they came in the 70s separately,
right.
And they met here and they got married. For most Palestinians, I think almost every Palestinian, even though you're raised somewhere else, you're born and raised somewhere else, you stick true to your roots. You still, have those ties. And so, my parents raised us here and eventually moved back after 40 years to Palestine, where they retired. So going back to getting involved with CARE, I started off as a volunteer for over a decade. And then I became a board member, and then I became executive director.
You've got a lot of connections to the Mahoning Valley. You've got relatives as well as friends. And the valley does have a pretty large Muslim population. In Cleveland, how active is the Muslim population, or in the Cleveland area?
I would say we're very active. There are a lot of there are many mosques in the Cleveland area. Okay. There are many Muslims, very diverse communities from all different parts of the world. So yeah, we're very active. A lot of Muslim student associations on the different campuses. A lot of community organizations, and so yeah, we're a very big community. I would say in the thousands.
Oh wow! And Taji, you're usually a co-host with me, but today you're a guest because of your very strong views about the rise of Islamophobia and what I call hatred of Muslims. You're a native of Turkey, and you're also a Muslim. How did that influence your views, and where did you become so aware of what's going on? How did you become so aware of what's going on with Muslims?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say my background really had much to do with it, but I think it was my experiences over the last 26 years of living in the United States, and, you know, seeing the reactions, you know, in different ways to different events that are happening in the Middle East. I didn't, you know, before I came to the U.S., I didn't really have any opinions, and I grew up with a lot of American movies and American shows, so I had a very positive view of America, and I wanted to be here. And when I came, you know, it was just great. You know, I just loved the people, and you know, the first place I came to was Alabama. But I mean, I just loved the American people. They were very kind and polite, and you know, and I never really experienced anything negative. But then 9/11 happened.
Right.
And that changed everything, and that completely gave me my first awakening. I mean, the whole 9/11 was a shocking thing for me, but also, you know, the aftermath, when Muslim people were being attacked on the streets, and our professors were warning, you know, I was a student then, and they were warning Muslim students not to go outside for a while, you know, just afraid that they would be attacked. And I think a lot of things changed after that. I was still a student, and it was probably my first year in the U.S., and I watched this documentary about Islam on, I believe it was Fox News, and it just shocked me because, you know, the way they portrayed Muslims I was like, you know, where did they find these people? Because it was the extremists, like the only, you know, a very small percentage of Muslims in the world. It's not even like, I don't know, 0.01% of Muslims, but you know, they were showing those people as like average Muslims. And I thought, you know, if this is what people are watching, I don't really blame how they think. If I watched this, and if I wasn't a Muslim, I probably would have very negative views about Muslim. But I think, you know, I had like my final awakening in the last couple of years where, you know, I'm seeing so much anti-Muslim propaganda on the media, and also even the terminology used on mainstream media, it kind of helps like brainwash people to think a certain way about Muslims. And I realized there is an intentional effort to create this image of Muslims, like to vilify and demonize them.
And then in 2017, as Bataji said, and 9/11 was the breaking point, I guess, if there was one. And then 2017 along comes Donald Trump, and with his charge that, quote, Islam hates us. And as you try to push through this Muslim ban. And unfortunately, many of Trump's supporters agree with him. And let me read you what he said, and I'd like you to respond to this because it feeds into that perception about Muslims. He said, without looking at the various polling data, it's obvious to anybody the hatred is beyond comprehension. Where this hatred comes from, and why we still have to determine. Until we're able to determine and understand this problem and the dangerous threat it poses, our country cannot be the victims of horrendous attacks by people that believe only in jihad and have no sense of reason or respect for human life. If I win the election for president, we are going to make America great again. This was in 2015. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to touch a little bit on Taji's comment about, I had the same experience, just sitting, in my parents' living room. I was a child when 9/11 happened. I was in middle school. I was the only Muslim, the only Arab in my middle school in North Carolina. And I remember, the teacher turns on the television and we're watching this news report. And, the day before, all my friends, I was very popular in school, I had a lot of friends, and the next day it was, calling me terrorists and calling me, are you related to these, people who attacked the United States? And again, I was born and raised in this country. I'm an American just like everybody else, and my parents have contributed to this country, and so many of us have. And so that day changed my life forever, as it has for many Muslims. And then time went on, we kept seeing things on, in the news that were completely the opposite of what Islam teaches us, and what the opposite of your average Muslim. It's absolutely strange. And I remember just watching this, I'm like, I am learning terms that me as a Muslim did not know until somebody talked about it on the news. Some person who isn't Muslim, who doesn't know anything about Islam, that's not a scholar, that are introducing me to terms that I have not heard of, such as Sharia law, such as, jihad meant something completely different, and it still means something different than what the news is telling us.
Right.
When I was a child, I always loved that name, actually. I thought I'd one day have a son and I'd name my child Jihad, but that's not going to happen anymore, unfortunately, because I don't want my child to be picked on in school. Right. But so we're not alone in thinking this is so bizarre. Why is this happening? Because it's unnatural. It is absolutely unnatural. Let's go back to the basics. What is Islam? Islam means submission to peace. Literally, if you take the name apart, Salam means peace. Islam means submission to peace. What does it mean to be a Muslim? It means that you believe in one God, and you believe in all the messengers that came before Prophet Muhammad, including Jesus, Abraham, and Moses, and so forth. Okay, what are the basic principles of Islam? To worship God, to do good on earth, to be kind to your neighbor, to give in charity. Even when we break it down, even a smile is considered an Islamic rewarded behavior. To smile to just anybody. And then this whole rhetoric of Muslims being anti anybody else that isn't Muslim is so bizarre to me, because in the Quran it says, you worship what you worship, I worship what I worship. Right. That's very clear to me that, everyone has the right to worship however they want to. So when I'm seeing this stuff on the news, and Muslims this and Muslims that, and it's just completely the opposite of what I know as a Muslim, basically it is manufactured. It is a manufactured fear of Muslims. Islamophobia is a manufactured fear of Muslims. And what CARE dug into this. We did the research. We actually have if you go to Islamophobia.org, you'll find all the research. What we did is we traced the dollars. We said, why is there so much anti-Muslim hate being pushed out? All this propaganda against Muslims. And we said, okay, well, let's say, for example, a book was published. Who published the book? Who funded the book? And we traced it. We found out it was a multi-million-dollar industry to push this hate against Muslims, this rhetoric, this narrative that Muslims are anti-Western civilization. It has been so crazy that this was allowed to be pushed, and nobody verifies the facts. I mean, I think now people are starting to.
But it also seems it's a successful political tool, as Donald Trump has shown. Because I will point out that after 9/11, if you remember, George W. Bush was president, and he said, Muslims are not our enemy. The people who committed these horrendous, terrorist attack, they don't represent the entire Muslim community. And he was very, very careful to point that out. Not so Donald Trump, who seems to have found, he believes, I guess, or him and his supporters believe, to have found this sort of hammer that they're using consistently. Politically, what's driving this anti-Muslim Islamophobia? What's happening?
What's driving it? We know that fear is a tool to control the masses, right? And so, it doesn't make any sense. Muslims are just like everybody else. We go to work, we raise our children, We contribute to society. So again, it doesn't make any sense. So it is a political tool. And we've heard a lot of nonsense coming out of President Trump.
Yeah.
Things where he's making fun of the mentally ill and making fun of all sorts of people. It's very divisive. This is not the country that I, was raised to believe that we should be, right? So I think as Americans, we all need to question why are we being told to fear a group of people? Why are we told and being fed a certain narrative? We need to do our own research and think for ourselves. And that is what we should all do. That is a duty that every American should have and should take seriously. We should not just absorb what we are being told by certain people and just make sure that we think for ourselves. Hey, you know what? You don't know a Muslim? Why don't you go visit a mosque and get to know your Muslim neighbors? I'm sure they'll be just as welcoming as anybody.
But then, as I said in the introduction, along comes Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who proclaimed that the Council on American Islamic Relations is a, quote, foreign terrorist organization. This is a direct assault on a civil rights entity, a civil rights organization. As an executive director, how did that hit you when you saw that?
I'm going to say we're not surprised that there are people that want to attack CARE. We have had a lot of success in protecting our civil rights of our community and others. We've had a lot of success in just protecting our civil rights, which many would probably not want us to, right? Mm-hmm. And so I find it, completely absurd and bizarre that a governor in the United States of America thinks that it is appropriate to call a 501c3 nonprofit, registered nonprofit organization that has been around for 31 years and let's just talk about our mission. Our mission is to understand, to enhance the understanding of Islam, protect civil liberties, promote justice, and empower American Muslims, and thereby empowering all Americans. So to say that it is, to designate it as a foreign organization, it's a lie. It is not. There's no truth to that. We are here to protect the civil rights of American Muslims. We are the Council on American Islamic Relations. So, it's interesting because people can say whatever they want, but show us the facts. Back it up. There's nothing to back that statement up.
And Taji, last week, when we had the podcast on anti-Semitism, a Jewish leader talked about the attacks on Jews on college campuses. You're an academic, a former professor at Youngstown State. Just from the coverage viewpoint, why does it seem that the anti-Semitism gets much more attention on college campuses than Islamophobia?
Well, because it's accepted, it's normalized, and I think the word anti-Semitism is a lot heavier in some way than the word Islamophobia, and we consider it that way. But I'll give you an example of why. And I realized that about myself. I thought, wow, I am brainwashed with this, because I was watching this stand-up comedian, and he made a joke about Jewish people, and he said something that made me cringe. I was like, oh my God, that is so anti-Semitic to say. Because basically what he was doing was talking about something that the Israeli government did, and painting the whole Jewish population with the same brush, and saying something really horrible. And I thought, oh my God, that is just horrible, and it made me cringe. But then I thought, and then the same comedian said, we do this all the time to Muslims, and it's okay. And I thought, yeah, when people say stuff like this, I don't cringe that much. Even I am brainwashed about this, that it's okay to vilify Muslims, but other communities, you can't do that. You can lose your job, you can get kicked out of school, or there are a lot of consequences. But for Islamophobia, there are no consequences. I think, it's that like systemic propaganda against Muslims over like years and years, and I've been experiencing it, or at least, seeing, like if you are visibly Muslim, you probably get a lot more of that. Maybe it is something to do with our foreign policy, that they want to get support from American people, and it's so much easier if you just vilify Muslims who are suffering as a result of those.
And it does seem that the Jewish community is winning the PR war, that indeed when things happen against Muslim students, it doesn't get that kind of attention as it would if something happens against Jewish students. You're in an organization that is designed to not only, represent the civil rights of all people, including Muslims, but also to put out the word as to what the Muslim community represents and all of that. So how do you maneuver in this environment? What is being done?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to touch on a little bit about the question that you asked, Taji, is, so, we talked about attacks on Jewish students on campuses. My question is, how are these attacks, what is the criteria for these attacks to be measured? Are we saying that, Jewish students are being attacked, like physically attacked? Are there slurs being, thrown at them? Or are anti-genocide, anti-apartheid protests being counted as anti-Semitic? Because that's not the case, really, because being anti-genocide, being pro-human rights is not anti-Semitic. And I believe a lot of this is being measured in a way that is saying, okay, anything that is saying Palestinians deserve human rights is anti-Semitic. That is not the case. Many Jewish people are joining us in those protests against the genocide that is happening in Gaza, in Palestine. So when we have these numbers, it is important to dissect these numbers and understand where are they coming from and how are they measuring, what are the tools that they're using to measure these numbers. But definitely, I'm sure there are definitely a rise in anti a lot of things, anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish people, anti-Black. There is this hostility in this country against anyone that is different. And we need to change that. This is not an environment that we should be living in and raising our children in, and it is up to us to change that environment. You have to ask yourself, do I want to live and raise my family in a place that is full of hatred? And if the answer is no, then it is upon us to change that. But I've kind of gone off on a tangent here.
No,
so what was your question again?
I was talking about who's winning the PR war.
Who's winning the PR war? Well, like I said, the Islamophobia industry, the anti-Muslim industry, really is very well funded, and so maybe the PR war at the time, before social media, yes, I would say, the PR war is not being won by the Muslims, but now that social media is in the hands of every person, people are seeing with their own eyes what is going on. So I want to say I don't know if the PR war is being won by
the Jewish community.
I would say probably not. I think that the narrative is shifting a little bit, and we can really look at polls to really understand that a little bit more. But I'll tell you what. Growing up, I've always been vocal about being Palestinian, even before I wore hijab, before anyone who noticed that I'm anything other than American. And people constantly told me, I don't know where Palestine is. Where's Palestine? Where's Palestine? Now when I go to places, I'm wearing a kufiya or I'm wearing a Palestine necklace, people are very welcoming. I sometimes will get a discount whenever I'm going to go purchase something, which is very nice. People know what Palestine is now. And people are sympathetic to our cause and what is going on. And people have woken up since, the age of social media, and they're seeing what's going on. So
yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to add a couple things.
Sure.
I was hearing about this, like attacks on Jewish students on campuses, and I did some research. I was looking online, like what those attacks were, as you mentioned. I didn't really see anything that is tangible. It was just that the students felt, I guess, uncomfortable with protests.
Right.
You know, that was basically it. And of course, it wasn't the Muslim students, by the way. I mean, I was a professor at YSU for a long time, and I was the faculty advisor to a Muslim Student Association on campus. And majority of the time, like, Muslim students were so scared, they wouldn't even want to get involved with the Muslim student organization. I mean, Muslim students don't do anything on campus. They just go to school, come out, like, they don't want to deal with anything, you know, because they're so afraid in general. At least, like, that was my experience. I mean, you know, in recent years, it became a little bit different, but before that, that was the case. And I heard that there are some Jewish students who have served in the IDF in Israel, and there are, you know, those kind of students have been maybe shunned by some other students. I mean, not necessarily Muslim students, but other students in general. And I think those were counted as like attacks on Jewish students, which I'm not aware of, but I don't really know of any Muslim students attacking Jewish students. That's one thing. And the other thing about the PR, if you remember last week, Bonnie was talking about how they have taken all the local area teachers, took them to Poland to show them the Holocaust Museum and all that, so that they're informed. I don't think Muslims do anything like that. I don't think we either don't have the money, I don't know, like, to take people overseas and, you know, give them some experience and teach them. That never happens in the Muslim community. We don't have a lot of organizations like, you know, the Jewish organizations. And I'm thinking, you know, considering how much money is being spent to spread, you know, some kind of anti-Muslim argument, and Muslims aren't really spending anything, I think we are not doing too bad, honestly, you know, considering.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that a little bit, if that's okay. I'm a former educator. I was a history teacher, and it is crazy how much these textbooks that we use to teach our students are so politically driven. Right, so if you go to another state, you might get a different viewpoint in your history book, because depending on the political climate there. So I actually partnered up with Cleveland State University. They have a research lab called CARE, C-A-R-E, and we did a study on Northeast Ohio textbooks, history textbooks for high school students. And they scanned all of these textbooks for words like how Muslims, Middle East, Arab, Islam, how these topics were introduced in these textbooks being used to teach our children. And overwhelmingly, more than 90% of the time that Muslims, Islam, Middle East, Arab were mentioned in a way that we were anti-Western, anti-Western values, terrorists, oil, all of that stuff. It doesn't mention that the first country to recognize the United States of America as its own sovereign country was a Muslim country, was Morocco. It doesn't mention that. So how are we anti-Western values when we were the first country, the Muslims are the first people to recognize this country as a sovereign country? Number two, it doesn't talk about the overwhelming amount of inventions and discoveries that Muslim civilizations contributed to the entire world. Anything from medicine to astronomy and so forth. How come? You know, so these things, it goes very, very, very deep onto why there is so much hatred against Muslims. It's because it's taught to our students. It's spread all over on the media. It's used as a political tool to gain votes and so forth. But I do want to say that we talk about the incidents on campus. We talk about the anti-Muslim incidents. CARE, we did report that there were 8,658 incidents reported to us in 2024. I'll tell you what, like, for some reason, we often underreport incidents that happen to us. We don't want to cause a big fuss.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to cause a problem. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves. So that number is likely very low to what really has been happening across the country. And I can speak from a personal experience. When I started in 2023 as executive director, the year before me in 2022, we had 60 incidents reported to us, just 60 in Northern Ohio. And then at the end of 2023, it jumped to over 400. And at the end of 2024, it was over 500. A lot of these incidents are students being harassed on campus, not just by other students, but by teachers and administrators themselves, which I find appalling as a former educator. One incident I'll talk about near and dear to everyone here is I had an incident reported to me from Youngstown State University. A student was being harassed by a student on campus.
When you say harassed, to what extent? Was it verbal? Was it physical? Was it bullying? Explain the word harass.
Without sharing too much details,
Okay.
basically it was another student had some kind of platform.
Okay.
And interviewed the student at a protest, took her words out of context, cut it up, and made it seem like she was part of some kind of, terrorist organization
Right.
of some sort. And, there were a couple of other incidents that happened to this individual from the same individual. I joined her in this meeting that she had on campus. And by the way, I reached out to the president of YSU several times, or a couple of times at least. Never got a response back. Usually, when I email presidents and universities, they respond right away. Did not get a response. So I joined the student to be her advocate, and the hostility that I received as an adult, as someone there to advocate for the student, was absolutely appalling. And I can't imagine being a Muslim student at YSU, a Palestinian student, after how I felt there as an outside organization to help advocate for the student. Basically, what I got from that meeting was, okay, you can report it through this channel, but it's likely nothing's going to come from it. And it seemed like this individual that was, from the YSU administration seemed to me to be discouraging the student from advocating for her rights. So, to be honest, I think that if Muslim families need to understand where they're sending their children to, where they're investing their dollars to pay for tuition, and see, is this a good climate for my child to be in?
What year was this?
I want to say it was in 2024. I believe it was 2024, maybe the end of 2023, actually. So, but yeah, I was just astonished by the lack of care that I witnessed with my own eyes for this student who felt very scared. Very scared. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like brushed off.
Did you attempt to have a meeting with the president of YSU?
I did.
And what was the response?
No response. And when I went to that meeting, I even walked up to the president's office. And I spoke to, I believe it was his assistant, and I said, I've been trying to get in contact with the president. I have not received any response. And he gave me another email to use. I still didn't get a response.
This is not new. So why is it still happening in this day and age? Why is it that Muslims still feel, sort of pressured or under attack or, intimidated? Why? And what is it like today to be a Muslim living in America? Because I know what it's like to be an immigrant living in America, but what's it like to be a Muslim living in America today? Taj, you want to go start and then...
You know what it is like? I'll give you an example. Imagine you're a white American and you go to a foreign country that they've never seen a white American in their lives before, but they've only seen white Americans in the context of like mass shootings on TV. And all they know about a white American is like those men who go into an elementary school, kill 20 people, or go into a church, bomb, and kill a lot of civilians. Like, imagine being an American in a country who thinks of you in that term. like, this is how it feels. If that's an
absolutely.
accurate description. Speaking of YSU, I didn't really see any of that before. When Jim Tressel was the president, I really didn't feel. I mean, he seemed to be more supportive.
There was a lot of outreach.
Yeah, there was a lot of outreach. So
right.
I do want to mention that, just because I taught at YSU for so long. But there was that one time I remember feeling so offended. It was a commencement ceremony, and Rob Portman was the commencement speaker. And, in his speech to students who are the graduating class, and I'm there as a faculty member, he mentioned Islamic terrorism or Muslim, and I thought, why do you have to, you can talk about terrorism, but why do you have to just make sure you mention Muslim or Islamic? Because, if somebody is a criminal, and if they're not a Muslim, nobody mentions their religion. But if a criminal happens to be Muslim, you always mention their religion. And not only that, but you also attribute their criminal act to their Muslimness. When I see that all the time, and I watch that on TV all the time, it does make me feel very offended that, they are basically creating that image that, like, terrorist and Muslim are kind of like the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, in college, I actually took a class called the Politics of Terrorism class, because if I'm going to be constantly called this term, I want to understand what it is and why. And to my surprise, as a Muslim student sitting and taking this class at East Carolina University, to my surprise, I found out that actually most of the terrorism is domestic terrorism to the United States. Domestic terrorism from white Americans.
Yes, because mass shootings, most of the mass shooters are not Muslim, and they're not immigrants.
Exactly. So why is this being put together as Muslim terrorism? It doesn't make any sense. It absolutely makes no sense. But how does it feel to be a Muslim in the United States, in America? Like I said, I was born and raised here, and constantly having to announce that I have every right to exist here and practice my faith in peace is exhausting. I wonder what it would feel like not to have to feel that way, right? Just to be able to practice and everyone, be who they are. And that's really what this country is supposed to be, right? It's really difficult. I'm raising my son, he's 5 years old, and raising him, to be a proud Muslim American in an environment that, may or may not accept him. It's very sad to see an innocent child having to face anti-Muslim hate.
Was there ever a time, especially after 9/11 and now recently, that you have sort of paused about wearing a hijab, or paused about wearing, sort of the Islamic, sort of necklace? And have you ever had to have looked yourself in the mirror and think, what am I doing? I'm putting myself out there.
Yeah. Absolutely not. Like I said, I was, raised in Greenville, North Carolina, and very, very few Muslims there. And I put on hijab when I was 18 years old, against my parents' recommendations. And it is something that I am very proud to wear. I feel very safe and secure in it. It was my choice. And I never, ever doubted my decision. And, everyone is different. But this, for me personally, no, because to me, it's a symbol of strength. It is a symbol of pride in myself. Growing up in Greenville, it's very hot weather, right? You see people wearing very short shorts, and it's hot, so people are dressed this way. And I remember, before I put hijab on, seeing a male student looking at a female student in a way that I never ever want to be looked at. I felt I felt violated, and it wasn't me that he was looking at. And I knew right then and there that I would feel more comfortable dressing this way. And it is a very, if you look at many other religions, if you look at the Virgin Mary, what is she wearing? She's dressed just like me. A lot of Jewish women wear similar clothing. And for me, no, I 100% have never doubted ever even wearing a hat to blend in, and I would never do that. But everyone has, and some people have chosen maybe to wear a hat or maybe to wear something that looks less Islamic, and that's okay, because that's, you have to do what makes you feel safe. But again, against my parents' wishes, I put it on, and I've never looked back, and I proudly wear it. And right after that, I ended up being a center of somebody's art project on campus. She followed me around for a whole semester with a camera, and I was a part of an art exhibit called Unveiled. And it was really to bring attention to like a Muslim woman just basically living her life like everybody else.
Have you ever been verbally or accosted by somebody who said, you're living in America, why don't you dress like an American?
Yes, I have. And I think many Muslims probably have experienced similar situations. A recent one, which I thought was really funny, it was a nice sunny day, we had a little breeze, I wore a summer dress, and I put, of course, wearing my hijab, walking into a smoothie place, and someone goes in their car, "This is America, wear shorts." Like, is that the only value you think that Americans should have, is that they wear shorts? Yes, it's America, and that's why I chose to dress like this, because I have my freedom to do so. So why does what I'm wearing bother anybody else? Like, it's me, it's my body. Just like everyone has the choice to do whatever they want to their own selves and wear however they want to. I chose to dress like this, so why does it affect anybody?
There is a growing sentiment in this country, especially since Trump, not only the first term, but this time around, that America is a Christian nation, and that as a Christian nation, America's values are Christian values. And therefore, if you want to live in America, you sort of should adhere to those Christian values. And in fact, Vice President J.D. Vance, whose wife is Ohioan from Cincinnati and is a Hindu, actually said publicly that he would hope that at some time his wife would convert to Christianity. He's converted to Roman Catholicism as an adult. How does that make you feel when you hear that? Taji, go for it.
Saying that America is a Christian nation, personally, I don't mind it if they're talking about, like basic Christian values are not in conflict with Muslim values in general. So, if the majority of this country is Christian, then, if they want to see it as a Christian nation, it's a country of immigrants, and there are a lot of different kind of people. There's so much diversity in this country. But personally, I don't really mind it. It doesn't bother me. But if they want to, America is a Christian country, Christian nation, they mean that we are going to implement like Christian Sharia law, that would bother me, because I don't ever want to live in a country which is ruled by religious law, and it includes Muslim countries. Like, I wouldn't want to live in a Muslim country that is not secular, because I think when politics and religion is mixed, it gets very ugly very fast. When the religion and politics start to blur, it doesn't lead to anything good. And it actually drives young people away from religion. So I think, there should be a separation of church and state. There should be a separation of mosque and state. That's what I believe.
Go ahead.
It makes me sad and disappointed in our education system. Where did we go wrong to where people think that this country is a Christian nation and should only be a Christian nation? Read the Constitution. Read the
Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence. Like, I'm alarmed that this amount of Americans don't understand what America actually is. Where are we going wrong in our social studies classes, in our civics classes? How come the average American doesn't know this? Or I'm not sure what the statistics are, but if that is what is being pushed out there, then I would tell them to go back to middle school or maybe even elementary school and learn about what America is, what our founding fathers, wanted for this country, and then come back and tell me what this nation should be. That I'm really, really astonished about how much people don't pay attention in class. It's Christian values are beautiful values, 100%. There are a lot of beautiful values that come from Christianity. Many are like Islam, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But this is not what this nation is. This nation is a nation of freedom of religion, freedom of being different backgrounds and having different viewpoints and different ideologies. If this is not the country that a person wants to be and where they have all of this freedom to be whoever they want to be, then I would say maybe this country isn't for you.
Okay, so you're deeply involved in the Muslim community. There was a poll, and this came out, this is all 2015 when Donald Trump was considering running for the presidency. And so there was a lot of stuff out there but based on what he was saying. And there was a poll conducted, and I don't know how legitimate this poll is because I never showed how many people were polled. But one of the findings, according to this thing, was that 51% of those polled agreed that Muslims in America should have the choice of being governed according to Sharia law. Have you ever heard this?
In my quest to understand what was being put out there about my community, I looked up what Sharia law is. So, Sharia law has nothing to do with anybody else, okay? Sharia law basically is guidelines for Muslims on how to live. How do you dress? How do you treat one another? Inheritance, like how does that get divided up? That's Sharia law. How do you get married? How I get married doesn't affect you, does it?
Right.
No. So I'm definitely going to follow Sharia law as a Muslim, as a practicing Muslim, as a guide for me on how to live my life. Sharia law also states that you must follow the law in the land that you live in. So just because I'm Muslim doesn't mean that I get to go a different speed limit than anybody else in this country, right? I still have to follow the law. So am I surprised by this poll? I think the question is so bizarre. Like, it's like not your question, but the polling question. Yes. So it's like if Catholics, it's like saying, should Catholics be governed by? Is it what is the
canon
law?
Canon law.
Of course, that's what they wanted to do. Then let them.
And in fact, when John Kennedy was running for president at JFK, in a very staunch Catholic family, there were concerns in this country that the Pope would be calling the shots if he became president. There were people legitimately saying that we're going to be ruled by Rome, by the Vatican, if John Kennedy became president. But so how did Sharia law become equated with jihad and violence and terrorism? Because that is a perception in this country.
So let's take a look at the definition of jihad.
Okay.
Jihad, it means to strive. It's a struggle against your nafs, your desires, right? So jihad can be different forms. So one of the forms, for example, I can give you is wearing a hijab. When it's much easier for me not to wear a hijab, right? But I'm struggling to hold on to my faith in a country in an environment that maybe is hostile to people who dress like me. That's jihad. Going out every single day dressed the way I am is jihad. Jihad is also to, it's to strive against basically your desires. I would say my humble opinion that marriage is a jihad.
It's a struggle.
It is a struggle. I've been married for 15 years, alhamdulillah, to my lovely husband. Love him so much. But let's be real here. it takes a lot of patience, right? And to stay married and to struggle and to strive against, wanting to be always right, or wanting to, to leave and bounce and start a new life. That's a struggle. That's jihad. So when jihad is misused this way, it's completely bizarre to me, because I don't understand why people are not looking up the definition. Jihad can also mean, and it is the weakest form of jihad, it does, it could also mean to take up, to fight, right? But with fighting, there comes a set of Islamic laws, right? Islamic laws that pertain to what does it mean when you have to fight in war, right? And I'm not a scholar, but I'll give you one example. One of the examples is a rule of war in Islam is to leave people who are like practicing, like for example nuns and monks, to leave them alone, to not tear down a tree where an animal can seek shelter and like birds making homes and so forth. So to equate jihad with something vile and scary and terrorism and so forth, it doesn't make any sense.
Yet that seems to be the prevailing view in a lot of European countries and in America, that in fact jihadists are all terrorists, and therefore all Muslims support
what they call jihadis. They mean terrorists, basically.
Right.
Like in Turkey, we don't call them jihadis; we call them terrorists. And many of those people would be in jail in Turkey, if they are killing innocent civilians.
Right.
That is not, there's nothing in Muslim law or Muslim belief that you can do that. You cannot kill an innocent civilian. If you do that, you're a terrorist. And that's it. But I think it's the word that is attached to it. I mean, we always say Muslim terrorist, jihadist, those are just, I feel like they are very intentional words that are used. And in many cases, some of those terrorist acts are, almost always political. It's not a religious thing. And I think, this was, I was watching a show on TV, and they were talking about the Palestine situation. The Palestinian conflict is not a religious thing. I don't know how you feel as a Palestinian, but I don't think it's a Muslim against Jew type of thing. I think it's just a justice and fairness issue. It's just civil rights of, a group of people that are ignored. And I don't think it is a religious thing in the minds of any of those people.
100%. So I'm going to touch on that, but going back to your question about this is what people believe. Yes, this is what we're being told. This is what we're being fed.
Right.
And it doesn't make it actually real. Doesn't make it right. I mean, for years and years and years and years, Americans were told that white Americans were superior to black Americans. And we know that that was not true. They had some funky science that wasn't real to say that blacks were inferior to whites, and that wasn't true. So I definitely encourage people to read about this. Just because we're being fed something doesn't mean it's real. But going back to Palestine, it is not a religious war. 100% it's not a religious war. There are Palestinian Muslims, there are Palestinian Christians, and there are Palestinian Jewish people.
Sure.
And so what is it about? It's about human rights. It's about being able to live in peace with equal rights and equal, just equality across the board, no matter where you're from. Just because you are of a certain faith doesn't mean that you should have more rights than anybody else. And just because you're a certain faith doesn't mean that you can come in and steal somebody's home and say that my family was here 3,000 years ago. That doesn't make any sense. Purchase the land just like anybody else. Nobody has the right to steal anything from anybody, and nobody has the right to say I'm better than you just because I am a different faith. So it is not about religion at all.
And another thing I should mention, don't forget what you're going to ask, but there's always this like suicide bombings and all that's equated with like Muslims and jihadists and all that. Suicide is one of the biggest sins in Islam, like the one that God won't forgive, because only God gives you life and only God can take life. You cannot even take your own life, right? I mean, I'm not a scholar, but that is what I have always been taught, that suicide is not even acceptable.
It's been a long time since I read this, but in my politics of terrorism class, we learned that suicide bombing and this type of terrorism actually didn't originate from Muslims or the Palestinians and so forth. It actually originated, I believe it was Sri Lanka. But don't quote me on that, because it's been a long time since I read that. But going back to taking innocent lives, in Islam, if you take one life, it is as if you've taken all of humanity, right? You get this, basically the sins of that. And I found through all of my activism and advocacy alongside the Jewish community here in Cleveland, I found that saying is actually the same in Judaism. If you take an innocent life, it's as if you took all of humanity.
And if you save an innocent person, it's like you've saved all of humanity.
But would you agree that Islam suffered a huge setback and Muslims suffered a huge setback as a result of the October 7, 2023 Hamas executions and invasion, whatever you want to call it? Of course, triggered the kind of response that we know what the outcome has been in Gaza. After October 7 is when a lot of people who would otherwise, and I've known for years, would otherwise have been very thoughtful, level-headed, sort of became harshly critical of the Islamic world. So how do you explain that when you're trying to make the argument that Islam is not, a religion of violence, that Muslims are not inherently, murderers and terrorists and all of that, when you have that kind of a situation that occurred on October the 7th?
October 7th is one day. I think to understand the entire situation, one needs to learn what led to October 7th. And I want to be clear. Any taking of anybody's life is an atrocity. Whether they are Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whatever they are, it is an atrocity. But to say that Muslims are terrorists, to say that Muslims are violent because of what happened on October 7th is not a fair assessment of what really happened. And then if we're using that measurement, that one day, let's take a look at ourselves in America. How many wars were we a part of, and how many innocent lives have we taken? Are we violent as Americans? Are Americans violent? And that wouldn't be a fair assessment, right? And so...
I was thinking...
I know Taji wants to get into this discussion, so go ahead.
If you're, let's say, like you live in the Middle East, okay, and you watch, what's happening to the Middle East in general. And I want to make it clear, Middle East is not like a one single entity. There are a lot of different countries, a lot of different languages are spoken, very different cultures, most of the time. But in the Middle East, you hear the news about, because those are countries that are close to each other, and you hear the news. And think about Iraq. Like, how many civilians did we kill in Iraq? And those people had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, right? And we attacked and bombed and killed so many people there. And then, there are terrorist attacks in, there was a terrorist attack in Yemen that killed the entire government of Yemen or something. There was a terrorist attack in Jordan recently. And you see all of those every day. And then you watch the news, and the only one they talk about is October 7. And it is horrible. And I think it was a terrorist attack. I believe that, if they killed any innocent civilians, it is terrorism. And it doesn't matter who does it, I don't care if it's a government, if they kill innocent civilians, it's terrorism, and it's a terrorist act. I mean, there have been so many terrorist attacks in the Middle East, and we hear about this. And when I was growing up, like I remember distinctly in middle school, one day I had female teachers walk out of the teacher's room crying, and we were all wondering like what's happening. And they were watching something that happened in Palestine on TV. And when I came to the US, I was like, nobody knows anything about any of this. And it's so easy to tell people that, you know, like these people are terrorists and they have done this attack when they know nothing about like the history and what happened before. And I mean, they're all equally terrorist attacks. Like, I'm not saying one is worse than the other. It's just that I feel like, you know, it makes me feel offended that like that is brought up all the time, but the others are never brought up. Or when you watch something on TV and they're talking about this and there's a Muslim guest and they will ask, do you condemn October 7th? As if like who wouldn't condemn a terrorist act? Like as if Muslims are okay with this and they won't condemn. Like I find it offensive that they constantly ask this, but they never ask this question to the other side. You know, when you have like clearly terrorist, I mean, you took the terrorism class, you probably have a better idea. Like, you know, what would you call it? Like what happened in Jordan? Is that a terrorist attack? What happened in Yemen? Is that a terrorist attack? You know, like, so why don't we use the same terminology? I mean, if you're going to talk about it, yeah, let's talk about it. Like, I'm not saying Muslims are like the most innocent people in the world. I complain about a lot of things that Muslims do, right? But it's just, you know, the double standards that really get to me.
Yeah. Well, definitely we're not a monolith, right? And we can't be held responsible for every Muslim person's actions. But so going back to October 7th, and what happened after, now let's keep in mind, Gaza was under siege for basically 2 decades. Nothing can come in, nothing can come out. Right? They had a very restricted diet because of resources that, you know, they didn't have, water, electricity, all of this stuff for almost 20 years. And then October 7th happens, and what was our role as Americans? Our government funded this genocide. Over 20,000 children were murdered. Children were murdered in Gaza from our U.S. tax dollars that funded the bombs that went and took their lives, innocent children. And not to mention the men and women, the civilians that were taken, right? Their lives were taken, and that was funded by us. Instead of funding American people, our U.S. tax dollars was used to kill children. And so you want to talk about violence and who's violent. Let's take a look at ourselves.
But that would not surprise you, given the relationship between Donald Trump and Netanyahu, or the American administration and the Israeli government. I mean, that's not a surprise that America would obviously take the side of Israel in this thing. But I think, and Taji wanted to talk about this because, you know, the 60,000 plus deaths in Gaza, half of which are women and children, I guess. That's according to the Gaza Health Ministry. It's atrocious, but what do you say to people who say, hey, you cannot be surprised at Netanyahu's response given what occurred on October the 7th? Or are you suggesting that even if there hadn't been no October the 7th, there would still be this war in Gaza? I mean, that's...
Yeah, I want to break down a few things here. Mentioned it's not surprising that the United States would take the side of Israel. It is surprising. Why? Let's ask ourselves, why is the United States such great allies with Israel? What do we gain from that relationship? Can anyone answer that for me? What does the United States of America gain from the relationship with Israel? Nobody can answer that for me. Is it security? Is it secure? Well, before 1948, there was no security problem. right? Before the creation of Israel.
Right.
So, I mean, the number, I think it's like in the billions. Is it 3 billion or 3 million or something like that of our U.S. tax dollars goes to fund Israel and their citizens' lifestyle, free health care, free education, free all of this. We're funding that as Americans. What do we receive in return for this relationship with Israel? While Americans are starving on the streets. Just yesterday, actually, CARE hosted a free food and resource drive that was for all people. Because our country, our government decided, let's cut off some SNAP benefits, let's decrease their benefits, all this stuff. And we had to step up. Other people are stepping up to support this. Why is that the case? Again, I don't understand. It is surprising that the United States decided to side with a foreign entity that has time and time again proven to violate human rights, international law, and so forth. What are our values as Americans? I don't understand why we have this relationship. But going back to October 7th, would Israel have conducted what they did after October 7th if the event of October 7th didn't happen? Of course they would have. We can look back and see how many times they have bombed Gaza over the last 2 decades. And they didn't have an October 7th. Israel is very clear about their intentions. They very much said it very clearly in all their videos and the IDF and so forth. We are going to wipe the Palestinians off this land, and we're going to make it, all of it, Israel. Mm-hmm. It's very clear that this is genocide and ethnic cleansing, and that was their intention prior to October 7th. So, yeah, I mean, and the number that you mentioned, 80,000, it's actually likely more. More people were killed. Bodies that cannot be found under the rubble because they don't have the equipment to retrieve them. It's likely more. There's bodies missing. There's children that are missing. So, a couple points here. Why are we as Americans supporting a foreign genocidal entity? Why are we funding it? Why are we killing children? That is terrorism to me. And number 2, Israel is very clear about their intentions. They want to wipe Palestinians off the face of this earth. They do. They've said it many times in many different ways. And they've shown us that that is exactly what they are going to do, and they are doing it. So I think we need to question, why is America funding terrorism?
And given that question, I've always had a bleak assessment of what's going on in the Middle East. I do not believe there's ever going to be peace in the Middle East. That's just me. And I just don't think that there is a way to build the kinds of bridges that are necessary for the Palestinians and for the Israelis to live side by side. Something has to give. And that's there. That's over there, and they'll never sort it out. But in this country, what do you do going forward when there is this growing anti-Muslim Islamophobia feeling throughout the country that indeed, Muslims are not to be trusted. Muslims are, are not American. Muslims don't love America. So how do you go forward with that in that context?
Well, I'm just going to keep practicing my faith, which teaches me to be good to my neighbors, which teaches me to be peaceful, which teaches me to be just and fair. I'm not going to do anything extra outside of my faith for people to believe that I'm a good person and that I deserve to live here. I know I deserve to live here. Actually, Muslims helped build this country. This country was built on the backs of enslaved Africans, many of whom were Muslim. So we have deep roots here in America, and I'm not going to go out of my way to prove that I have the right to live here and to be here and practice being Muslim. I'm going to continue to practice my faith, and if people want to see what that looks like, that's, come and have a cup of coffee with me and learn about Islam and learn about my values and what Islam is. But I'm not going to go out of my way to prove that I'm a decent human being and that I'm not what the news says about us. I only have one, I'm only going to please one, and that is God. And that is all I'm going to be doing. And then I think practicing my faith will show people what Islam really is, and maybe it'll change their perceptions. But I'm not responsible for what people think of me. I'm responsible for what I think of myself and how I act and how I behave, and following my faith and what God intended for me to do. And I will raise my child to be a proud Muslim and to know that he has every right to be here. And we're not going to bend over backwards for people to understand who we are. It is up to them to go out to understand. And that is my philosophy. I'm going to continue on being who I am.
And Taji, I mean, you've seen what is going on college campuses. You've sort of watched this from up close. Do you have any optimism about the future and about how, especially in this environment and in Donald Trump's America, how you go forward as far as being a Muslim?
Well, I just want to correct one thing.
Sure.
You were talking about like peace in the Middle East. Of course, if we are talking about Palestine,
right.
I don't know if I have a lot of hope that things will change, because I think it depends on like powerful people to be acting with justice, and if they don't, then we're not going to see any peace there. But there is peace in the Middle East in general. Like if you look at a lot of the Muslim countries, there's a lot of peace. There's not as much violence in any of those countries as there is in the United States. I mean, sometimes I have friends who come with me to Turkey and they're like, we never felt threatened. Like we are on the streets at 3 a.m. in the morning and it's safe, So this notion that there is no peace in the Middle East is not correct. Like there is a lot of peace in the Middle East. In general, there are a lot of countries that are super safe for everybody. Violence is not, we don't have any mass shootings. We don't have any gangs on the streets all the time. Like it's very, very rare to see any of that in the Middle East. First of all, like I wanted to correct that. And secondly, I think one of the things about Muslims is they just usually keep to themselves. They don't want to speak out a lot. I mean, even I have friends who just like tell me not to come out on this podcast and talk about things. They're like, somebody's going to shoot you. They're going to kill you. Like they're afraid to speak. And they don't want to say anything. They just want to live their lives. But the thing is, I think American people don't know anything about Muslims other than the image that is created on the media, and they have this image of Muslims that is just like this one particular type. They probably think most of them are just Arabs, like maybe terrorist-looking guys with long black beards. That's like the image. But Muslims are such a diverse people. I mean, there are Chinese Muslims, there are Asian Muslims, there are Muslims in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. There are Muslims who doesn't fit any of the stereotypes that these people have. So people may be talking to a Muslim, they wouldn't even know. I think that will, probably at some point register and people will realize like Muslims are not this one kind of people. They are the most diverse people in the world. The majority of Muslims and the majority of Muslim countries, I think, are very safe and peaceful people. Sometimes I see, what some of the Jewish advocacy groups do, and I feel like Muslims need to do these things. Like they never do that, or they should like open up more and talk to other people. But then I think like, why do we have to do that? I mean, it's just like I don't know what the answer is. Honestly.
And that goes. Let's end with that question. Why do you have to do that? And the reason being, if you don't do that, all of a sudden you're being defined by other people. You're being defined by the larger population. So let me ask you specifically, what is CARE doing, not only regionally but nationally, to sort of do what Taji was talking about, to educate, to show the larger American population that all Muslims are not terrorists, that Islam is not a terrorist religion? What are you all doing as an organization?
So, CARE has been for 31 years around educating people about Islam, promoting, again, the rights of all Americans and so forth. I can talk about what we've been doing here.
Yeah.
We've been conducting Know Your Rights presentations that are open to everybody, and all of our programs are open to everybody. I have never turned away anyone that has called our office for help, and I have helped Jewish people, I've helped Christians, I've helped people who are not Muslim or Palestinian or Arab, and anyone who needs help that comes to our door, we will help them. And so, these types of interactions, I think, speak volumes. And then the other thing that we do is we do things like, for example, we have Tea Time for Peace. Tea Time for Peace is sort of with CARE. We are totally involved in it. What we do is we take turns at different religious facilities, whether it be a synagogue, a church, a community center, a mosque, and we meet with different groups of people, and we basically, over a cup of tea, we just chit-chat, and it really builds relationships and breaks down these barriers that people thought that they had or perceptions that they had about the other. And so what are we doing, I guess, across the country is we are providing services to people across the country. We are leading by example of what Muslims and Islam is, and that is to fight against injustice, even if it is, and this is an Islamic saying, we need to fight injustice even if we are the ones causing the injustice. And so tell me a more fair thing to do, right? And so that's, we're doing many things across the country, but one thing I want to say before we end is the question about hope. Do I have hope that there's going to be peace? Absolutely, I have hope. I have hope that one day that we will see a peaceful and a free Palestine. We will see Palestine as it once was, where Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people lived side by side, and they watched each other's children, right? The most sacred things that you have. Because it can't go on like this. It's not going to be, it has happened.
It has happened before.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it not to happen in the future.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. The way it's going now is not sustainable for Israelis, for Jewish people living under this Israeli government, and it's just not sustainable. We have to live in this world, and I think we're going to come to this understanding that we're all going to be here, and it doesn't make sense anymore. And we have that's the hope that I have. I have the hope in humanity that people are going to wake up and say, you know what, enough is enough, and it's time to live in peace.
Thank you both. It was really, really interesting. Taj and I, when we started talking about doing this, and we started talking about anti-Semitism and now Islamophobia, and I've gotten calls and texts from people saying, well, next you should do one on, the Catholics who are, especially in Africa, who are being, thing, and then somebody else, and, we know somebody who's a Baha'i, and I was thinking we need to do something with the Baha'is as well, and because we really want to focus on hate and hatred. But we had talked about doing this, and I said, I'd love to be able to put together a panel to have an actual debate between Muslims and Jews to talk about all of these issues we discussed. So, perhaps we'll be reaching out to you at some point and see how we can get that together. But, we are hoping that this is educational, because it really does need, a sort of a broader view of things. And right now everybody's in their own little silo, and they're only getting news and information from that silo they're living in. And, and this is what happens when you don't have a broader knowledge of what's happening in our communities. So again, thank you very much, and thanks for coming all the way from Cleveland. We'll be talking again.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.